When my son said, "You've done enough, Mom," I didn't understand what he really meant. At first, I thought he was thanking me. It sounded like something kind, something a son would say when he realizes how much his mother has done for him. But the way he said it, soft, distant, and careful, it wasn't gratitude, it was goodbye. That night, his words echoed in the quiet house long after he had gone upstairs. "You've done enough, Mom." Enough? What does enough even mean to a mother? When does love ever stop being needed? I sat on the edge of the couch, the lamp still on, the TV still flickering to an empty room. For years, my life had revolved around making sure he was happy, that both my children were safe, fed, and loved. I used to believe that was my purpose, the one thing I was born to do. But somewhere between growing up and growing apart, that purpose started to fade. And I didn't even notice when it happened. It all started long before that night. Back then, I was just a simple woman from a small town, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, and where the smell of dinner drifts from one porch to another at sunset. I lived in a modest yellow house with peeling paint and a front garden full of overgrown roses that refused to die no matter how badly I trimmed them. That house had seen everything: laughter, birthdays, storms, and quiet mornings filled with coffee and the sound of my children's footsteps on the stairs. My husband, David, worked at the local hardware store. He wasn't a man of many words, but he had a good heart. He loved the kids fiercely, even if he didn't always know how to show it. And me? I was the glue, the planner, the peacemaker, the one who remembered who liked extra butter on their toast and who hated waking up before 8 a.m. That was my role. That was my joy. Our son, Michael, was the older one, quiet, thoughtful, always observing the world around him. As a child, he'd sit by the window during thunderstorms, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. I used to sit beside him, pretending I wasn't afraid, even though every rumble made my heart jump. He'd look up and say, "Don't worry, Mom, it's just the sky talking." And somehow, that one sentence made me feel safe. Our daughter, Lily, was the opposite, full of life, laughter, and questions that never seemed to end. She'd chase after the neighbor's cats, bring me dandelions, and declare, "This is for you, Mommy. It's a magic flower." For a long time, I believed her, because every time she smiled, the world did feel a little more magical. Those years passed like gentle seasons. Birthdays turned into graduations, and before I knew it, my children were taller than me. The house that once felt so alive started to feel quieter, not empty, just different. The laughter was replaced with the sound of car keys jingling as they rushed out to meet friends, and the kitchen table slowly became a place for quick bites, not family dinners. I told myself it was normal. That's what every parent goes through. You raise them to be independent, to build their own lives. And when they finally do, you're supposed to be proud. And I was. At least. That's what I told everyone. But the truth? Every milestone felt like losing a little piece of something I loved. The first time Michael didn't need help with his homework. The first time Lily stayed out late and forgot to call. The first time I realized no one needed me to make lunch anymore. It's strange you spend your whole life wishing for peace and quiet, and when it finally comes, it feels like a punishment. Michael went off to college first. The night before he left, I stayed up late, folding his clothes, labeling his boxes, making sure everything was perfect. He came downstairs with his backpack slung over one shoulder and said, I smiled and said, "I know, but I want to." He hugged me tight, longer than usual, and whispered, I'll call you every Sunday. And for a while, he did. Every Sunday evening, I'd sit by the phone, waiting for that familiar voice. We'd talk about classes, friends, and his part-time job. Those calls were my weekly lifeline. But then the calls became shorter. Then they came every other week. Then once a month. And finally, they stopped. I didn't blame him. He was busy building a life. That's what I wanted for him. Still, there were nights when I'd pass by his empty room and whisper, "Good night, son," just to hear the sound of my own voice in that silence. Lily was still in high school then, but she started changing too. She wasn't the little girl with the dandelions anymore. She had her own friends, her own world, one that didn't always include me. Sometimes she'd come home, rush upstairs, and close her door without a word. I'd make her favorite dinner chicken stew with cornbread, but most nights she'd say, "I'm not hungry, Mom. I already ate." It's funny how those small sentences can break your heart in ways big arguments never could. David noticed I was growing quiet. He'd ask, "You okay?" And I'd always say, "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I was lonely. Not the kind of loneliness that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who no longer see you the same way. I kept myself busy. Volunteered at the church, baked for neighbors, cleaned rooms that didn't need cleaning. But deep down, I was still waiting for someone to need me again. Because when you've spent your whole life being Mom, you forget who you are without that word attached. Years passed, and both my children built their lives far from home. Michael got married first to a lovely woman named Rachel. She was polite, smart, and distant. Not unkind, but she carried herself with a quiet sort of authority, like someone who wanted her space respected. At their wedding, I stood beside them, smiling, clapping, taking photos, but inside, a small part of me was terrified. Terrified that I was being quietly replaced. I remember giving them a small housewarming gift, a quilt I had sewn by hand. Each patch told a memory. Michael's first blanket, pieces from his old shirts, fabric from the curtains in his childhood room. When I handed it to Rachel, she smiled softly and said, "Oh, that's sweet," and folded it neatly back into the box. I tried not to read too much into it, but when I visited them months later and saw that the quilt wasn't on the couch or the bed, I couldn't help but wonder if she had packed it away, along with everything that reminded Michael of home. Still, I didn't say anything. Mothers rarely do. We swallow our words because we don't want to be the reason for distance. We tell ourselves, as long as they're happy, I'm happy. And maybe that's true, until you realize happiness isn't something you can share from far away. When Michael and Rachel had their first child, my grandson Noah, I thought things would change. I thought I'd finally have a reason to visit more, to help, to feel useful again. But even then, everything had to be scheduled. Visits were short, polite, and planned weeks ahead. Sometimes I'd arrive with home-cooked meals, and Rachel would say, "Oh, you didn't have to do that. We're fine, really." And I'd smile, holding my casserole dish like a visitor holding flowers in a hospital room, trying to find a place to belong. Then came the day of the words that would stay with me forever. It was a Saturday evening. I had come over unannounced, not to interfere, just to drop off some groceries and see my grandson. Michael opened the door, surprised but not angry. He let me in, but his tone was uneasy. Rachel was in the kitchen, feeding Noah. She smiled politely, but there was tension in the air, the kind you can't quite name but can always feel. We sat in the living room for a bit, making small talk. Then, as I got up to leave, I turned to Michael and said, "You've been so busy lately. I thought maybe I could come by once a week to help out with Noah, just for a few hours." He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "Mom, you've done enough." Just like that. No anger, no softness either. Just final. And that's where everything began to change. Those 4 words replayed in my head for days, then weeks. I tried to convince myself it wasn't rejection, that maybe he was just tired, overwhelmed. But deep down, I knew. He was telling me that my part in his story was over, that I had raised him, loved him, guided him, and now it was time to let go. But how do you let go of something that once defined your entire life? How do you stop being mom when that's the only thing you've ever known how to be? After that day, something inside me changed quietly, like the way seasons shift without warning. No one else would have noticed it. I still smiled, still answered the phone when my daughter called, still baked cookies for the church bake sale. But there was a new silence in me, one that settled deep, where words used to be. Every time I thought about visiting Michael again, I stopped myself. What if I showed up and made him uncomfortable? What if Rachel thought I was interfering? I didn't want to be that kind of mother, the one who couldn't let go. So I began staying home more. Days passed slower, longer. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. I'd make 2 cups of tea instead of 1, pretending someone might drop by, but no one ever did. Lily would call sometimes. She lived 2 towns over, working as a teacher. Her life was busy, full, and I didn't want to be another responsibility on her list. Our conversations were always quick, cheerful, but short. "Hi, Mom. I'm good. Yes. Eating fine. No. Don't worry about me. Gotta run. Love you." And just like that, the line would go silent again. After every call, I'd stare at the phone, wondering if she ever paused after hanging up the way I did, just sitting there, listening to the silence that follows love. One afternoon, as I sat by the window knitting, I saw an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Carter, walking her dog. She waved, and I smiled back. She was in her late 70s, always cheerful, always surrounded by her grown children and grandchildren. They visited often. Her house was never empty. Sometimes, I'd see them gathered in her yard, laughing over barbecue, kids running around with water balloons. And though I was happy for her, I couldn't help but feel a small ache in my chest. I wondered, had I done something wrong? Did I smother my children with too much love? Or not enough? Was I too protective? Too giving? Too present? People say motherhood is the purest love, but no one warns you how invisible that love becomes once your children no longer need it. A week later, I decided to clean Michael's old room. It had been years, but I still couldn't bring myself to change much. His old baseball cap hung on the wall, and the bookshelf still had his childhood novels. As I dusted, I found an old photo, one of him as a little boy, holding a frog by the pond, smiling with missing teeth. I sat on the bed, holding that photo, and whispered, "You always said you'd take care of me when I got old, remember?" The empty room didn't answer. I laughed quietly to myself, not because it was funny, but because laughter felt easier than tears. Then I placed the photo on my bedside table. It was strange after all these years. That small picture gave me more company than the phone ever did. I tried to keep busy again. I joined a local gardening club, baked extra loaves to share with neighbors, even took morning walks by the river. The world outside my home was kind, people smiled, the sun still rose. But deep down, it all felt like background noise. My heart was still waiting for something, maybe a message, maybe a knock on the door, maybe just a moment where someone said, "We missed you." That moment never came. Months passed, and winter settled in. Cold mornings, foggy windows, and quiet evenings with the hum of the heater. One afternoon, the phone rang. It was Michael. My heart jumped. It had been weeks since his last call. "Hey, Mom," he said. his voice calm but rushed. "How are you?" "Oh, I'm fine," I replied quickly, hiding the joy in my voice. "How's everyone? How's Noah?" "He's good, growing fast. Rachel's been busy with work." He paused, as if deciding what to say next. "Listen, Mom, I wanted to ask if you could maybe not bring food over anymore. Rachel's been meal prepping, and she feels bad when we can't eat what you bring." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I knew he wasn't being unkind, he was just trying to keep peace. Still, his words landed heavy. "Oh, of course," I said softly. "I understand." He thanked me, said he'd call again soon, and hung up. I sat there holding the phone long after the line went dead. The stew I had just finished cooking was still warm on the stove. For the first time, I couldn't bring myself to eat it. After that, I stopped visiting altogether. I told myself it was better this way, that they needed space, that I shouldn't impose. But every time I walked past the little blue sweater I had knitted for Noah, folded neatly on the couch, I felt the same quiet ache. It was like being erased gently, not with anger or cruelty, but with polite distance. There's a kind of pain in being loved but not needed. A gentle, invisible kind of pain that no one sees because you still smile through it. Then one Sunday, Lily came over. It had been months since I'd seen her in person. She looked radiant, confident, busy, grown. We sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea. She told me about her students, her apartment, her plans to travel during summer break. I nodded, smiling, trying not to interrupt her excitement. Then, she paused and said something that stayed with me. "Mom, you should start living for yourself now. You've spent your whole life taking care of us." I smiled and said, "Oh, I'm fine, sweetheart. I like my quiet life." But inside, I thought, what does living for myself even mean? All my dreams were built around my family. Every recipe, every blanket, every plan I ever made started with them. Without them, I didn't know what to dream about anymore. After Lily left, I walked around the house, touching little memories, the dent on the wall from when Michael threw a ball indoors, the kitchen counter where Lily used to sit swinging her legs while I cooked, the tiny pencil marks on the doorframe measuring their heights over the years. Each mark, each scratch, each memory whispered a story that once had noise, laughter, warmth. Now, it was just me, the last page of a book no one was reading anymore. One morning, as I was making tea, I glanced at my reflection in the kettle. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. The tired eyes, the quiet expression, she looked like someone waiting for life to begin again. That's when I realized something simple but painful. I had been living like a guest in my own home. Everything I did, cooking, cleaning, even breathing, was for the memory of who I used to be, not for the person I had become. A few weeks later, I got a call from Rachel. Her voice was polite but hurried. "Hi, Mom. Michael's at work, but I just wanted to check if you'd be okay not visiting for Noah's birthday this year. We're having a small gathering with his friends from daycare, and we don't want to overwhelm him." For a second, I thought I misheard. Not invited to my grandson's birthday? I swallowed hard. "Oh, of course. That's fine. Kids get overwhelmed easily. Thank you for understanding," she said, and hung up. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, as the world went quiet again. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I just sat by the window and watched the streetlights blink on one by one. Somewhere, in another house, they were probably singing Happy Birthday, and I whispered softly to myself, "Happy birthday, Noah." From that day, I stopped waiting for invitations, stopped expecting calls, stopped checking my phone every few hours. I started walking alone in the evenings. There's something comforting about watching the world move, couples laughing, children running, dogs barking. Even if you're not part of it, it reminds you that life still exists outside your walls. One evening, as I sat on the park bench, I saw a little boy running to his mother, hugging her legs tightly. The mother smiled, kissed his head, and said, "You're my whole world." The boy laughed and ran back to play. I watched them quietly, smiling through the sting in my chest. That used to be me. That used to be my world. When I got home, I opened my old photo album. There were pictures of every stage, baby hands, school uniforms, graduations, weddings, and as I turned each page, I realized how fast it all went. One moment, you're holding their tiny hands, teaching them to walk, and the next, you're standing at the doorway, watching them walk away strong, capable, and no longer yours. I didn't blame them. In a way, I was proud. This is what I raised them for: independence, success, confidence. But I wish someone had told me that when your children grow up, love doesn't shrink. It just has nowhere to go. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I thought about calling Michael just to say hello, but I didn't. I thought about writing a letter, but even that felt too heavy. Instead, I whispered into the dark, "I'm still here, son. I'm still your mom." No one answered, but somehow, saying it made me feel a little less invisible. It was a Sunday morning, quiet, peaceful, and ordinary. The kind of morning where I used to make pancakes for my little boy. The sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, landing softly on the dining table. Everything seemed still, but inside me, something was shifting. I was folding laundry when I heard voices in the living room. My son and his wife were talking, not arguing, just talking in that hushed tone people use when they don't want someone else to hear. Her voice was the first I heard. "Your mom needs to rest, Daniel. She's done enough." There was a pause. Then his voice softer, lower. "I know, but it's hard to say that to her. She's always done everything for me." I froze. That sentence, "she's done enough," echoed in my head. At first, I smiled. Maybe she meant it kindly, I thought. Maybe she was worried about my health. But then, something in her tone didn't sound like concern. It sounded like finality. I stood there, holding a shirt that still smelled like detergent, and my heart started to race. Done enough? What does that mean? A mother never really stops being a mother.